You have been convinced to spend a small fortune on designer soaps that will make you absolutely irresistible to those people who you would rather not resist you. And then, after the first use, there your investment sits in a puddle of water slowly melting. Well, what you need, my friends, to ensure your continued irresistibility is a soap saver. This is a bar of pine tar soap called Morning Wood. Very risque. It makes me smell like a tree, and I got it hoping to attract some tree huggers, preferably of the cute variety. It hasn't worked so far, but I am being stalked by a family of squirrels. And when I'm not slathering myself in pine tar, this bar, $7 a bar of soap, sits on a soap saver. It sounds like a coupon for clean people, but it's really just a block of wood that has been cleverly cut to drain away the water and keep the soap from dissolving. I took a block that is 2.5 inches wide and 4 inches long. That's 6.35 centimeters by 10.16 centimeters for those of you living outside the United States, Liberia, and Myanmar. And I made a series of angled cuts to form a lattice. See that? The soap sits on the lattice, and the water runs down in between the lats, leaving the soap dry and undissolved. You cut the lattice on a table saw using a special jig to hold the wood at an angle to the blade. This is really just a beefed up notch jig. The block of wood fits in a notch or a cutout in this piece of plywood, and then it's held in place with these other strips of wood. Now, this particular notch jig, as you can see, will make up to 3 soap savers at one time. You can build this jig to make as many or as few soap savers as you'd like. You just sort of start with a single jig, just 6.5 inches long, that's 16.5 centimeters, and then you add 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters for each additional notch. You can use ordinary blocks of wood for this project, or you could glue up strips of contrasting wood, then plane down the laminated board and cut the blocks from that. It gives it some visual interest. Either way, this is a great project for using up the scraps you have lying around your shop. Cut the blocks so they fit their notches securely, tight, but not too tight. You don't want these things sliding around on you while you're trying to cut them on a table saw. Here's a tip. I make these blocks just a little bit bigger than they need to be. Then I take a piece of 100 grit sandpaper and I sand down the edges until I get a slip fit. Actually, I stop when it's just a little tighter than a slip fit. The reason for that is that this is one of the very few projects that you're going to do where you actually have to finish sand the project before you complete it. That's right. Once I get this where I want it, I'm going to sand the surfaces on this 100 grit sandpaper, ease the edges like that, and then I'm going to move on to 150 grit sandpaper. You see, once the lattice is cut, it just won't stand up to all this heavy sanding. Place the blocks in the jig and lock them down with the strips of wood. Now, before you cut, change to the smoothest cutting blade that you have. I'm using an 80-tooth plywood blade here, but you could also use a hollow ground planer blade if you have one. Adjust the depth of cut so that the blade slices halfway, or a little more than halfway, through each block. For example, if the block is 3/4 of an inch thick, adjust the depth of cut so the blade will cut 13/32 into the block. If it's 25 millimeters thick, adjust the blade so that it slices 13 millimeters into the block. That's about right there. Position the fence for the first cut, exactly 2 inches or 5 centimeters away from the inside edge of the blade. Make the first cut, pushing the jig all the way to the outfeed side of the blade. Don't back up the jig over the running blade. That's a recipe for a kickback. And after the cut, adjust the fence to 2¼ inches or 6.3 centimeters and repeat. Keep on going 1/4 inch at a time, or 6 millimeters at a time, until you have reached 5¼ inches, or 13.3 centimeters. Incidentally, if you're making these cuts for the first time, you won't have all the slots on the bottom of your jig that you see on mine. You'll be cutting the blocks and the slots at the same time. Afterwards, you can use the slots to double check that you've got the fence properly positioned before each cut. When you're done with the first series of cuts, loosen the clamps, flip the blocks end for end so the uncut side faces down, and replace the clamps. Now, we make the same series of cuts all over again. What happens if you don't have a reliable scale, like I have on my old trustworthy Delta here? Well, don't worry, I have a workaround. Let me show you on my old trustworthy Shopsmith. First, set your fence so that it is exactly 2 inches away from the inside of the saw blade. Then take a 12-inch or 30-centimeter ruler and make a photocopy of it, like this. Spray the photocopy with some spray adhesive, like this 3M77. Let that dry a little bit, and then sneak it under the fence. Line up the 2-inch mark on the ruler with the edge of the fence and stick it down like that. Now, obviously, this is not a permanent solution. This is going to wear away at some point, but it will serve you for making a couple of soap savers. If you want something more permanent, when you make the jig, make it a little long. Cut your first series of cuts and cut off the extra length that you don't need. Then you can use this to set the position of your fence each time. You can also use it to help set the depth of cut, like so. The blocks have been sanded, but you really need to do something about all those sharp corners you just created. You can see there's a few little feathers in there that need removing. So, take a square or a triangular file and lightly ease all those edges. Use very light pressure, especially at the corners. You don't want to break off any of those pieces of lattice. There. If you do happen to break something off, keep a bottle of cyanoacrylate glue handy. You can always glue it right back on and nobody ever need know. Once these soap savers are all sanded and filed, it's time for a finish. Now, you probably think this is going to be a pain in the neck, working that finish into all those slots in the lattice. However, it's no pain if you have one of these. Da-da-da-da! Yes. You just take this Ziploc bag, put the soap saver in it, pour in a little finish to replenish the one I finished before, seal up the bag, and roll the finish and the soap saver and the bag around until it is soaked into all the cracks. There it goes. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Now, Work that soap saver up to the top of the bag and let it drain for just a few minutes. Once all the extra finish is drained away, open the bag and let the soap saver have its freedom. Blot off the extra finish and set it aside to cure. Now they look fragile, but they're actually remarkably durable. We've been using one in our shop for months, and it's still all in one piece, still saving soap, and we all smell like trees.